Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. So the first thing, mollusks. So I interchanged the word mollusk shell and mussel. So I try to explain that in the beginning because I don't want to confuse anybody. It's all the same thing. So the story of the American natural pearls essentially begins with the Native Americans. The indigenous people collected the shells for food, ornamental purposes, and for currency. Now, it wasn't actually used as currency more or less than it was a valuable item that they would use for trading. Long before Columbus came along. In fact, the Hopewell Indian Mounds in Ohio contained thousands of pearls dating back over 2,000 years. Pearls like these. And these. And actually, this one is quite large. Unfortunately, none of them are lustrous. They've been buried in the ground for 2,000 years. So after Columbus arrives in the early 1500s, fleets of Spanish ships were sent to the Americas to find pearls, gold, and spices. So our treasured pearls from the Americas were sent back to Europe. Now those pearls were from this area here along this coast, which was called the Pearl Coast. So they would be saltwater pearls. One of the most famous of those pearls is La Peregrina, purchased by Richard Burton in 1969 for $37,000, given to Elizabeth Taylor as a Valentine's Day gift. It was found off the coast of Panama in the 1550s, taken back to King Philip II of Spain. He gave it to his wife, Mary Tudor, who was the daughter of Henry VIII. Now, there's a little history and some speculation that perhaps that's not actually the pearl that she's wearing there. So I think they're still doing some research. They're not sure. But it for sure is in the family because it shows up on Margaret of Austria, who is King Philip III's wife. And I have to say, if we look at that, and this design, it looks very similar. So I'd have to almost guess that it's the same one. But they're still doing some research on that. So by 1597, Spain receives 350 pounds of pearls. 350 pounds. I weigh 100 pounds. From the Venezuelan coastline. So they're estimated at 32 million. Now this is if it's 3 grains per pearl. So there are 4 grains to 1 carat to give you a reference point if you don't know what a grain is. But if we were to estimate these at 8 grains each, then we would be looking at $9.6 million in 1597. So by the 1540s, De Soto goes on exploration in the Savannah River area. So just to give you didn't know you were going to get a geography lesson today, right? Here we go. Okay, Savannah River's here. This is Georgia. I'm from Tennessee, this long state here. This is the Tennessee River. So I'm not too far from Savannah, but nevertheless, in 1540s, De Soto's exploration of the area comes in contact with a lot of the indigenous people. Meets up with one tribe, and at this tribe they have a temple, and in the center of this temple they find treasure chests full of pearls. So many that it would take 900 men to carry them off. Maybe treasure chests like this. Now this may be an exaggerated number or an account, but there were enough pearls to make a notable impression that they would say 900 men to carry them off. So not a whole lot is known between 1540s and 1850s until 1857. David Howell, a shoemaker in New Jersey, goes fishing or mussel shelling for his dinner. He brings it back home. He cooks up his mussel stew or clam chowder, and lo and behold, he finds a pearl in it. It's over 100 carats, actually. Unfortunately, because he had already cooked his meal, the pearl had been damaged. It would have been worth $25,000 in 1857, but it wasn't worth that much after that. So I'm assuming that was probably the most expensive meal he's ever cooked. Shortly thereafter, we find a carpenter finds a 93-grain pearl. It was sold to Charles Tiffany for $1,500 and later sold to the Empress of France, I'm sorry, and they named it the Queen Pearl, and it was worth $10,000 in a very short amount of time. Now, another geography lesson. Those two pearls came from the Passaic River, which is up here, near Patterson, right in this area. And just to give you perspective, this is Manhattan Island. So we're not very far from this site, right? Manhattan Island and Passaic. So a pearl frenzy breaks out. Schools even closed to let children go out into the waters to find pearls. This is how impressive it was. And by the summer of 1889, it's recorded $300,000 of pearls were found in the Wisconsin River. Now that's just one river in the United States. And by 1890, there were 93 pearls that were valued at $100,000 that were shipped overseas. 1890. Again, here we go with our map. So we're going to look at Wisconsin up here. The Wisconsin River's in here. Now, it's part of the Mississippi River here in this area. Now, I show this map again because we're talking about all the lakes and rivers that are in the United States. We have over 300 species of mollusks or mussels in our waters. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So by 1901, all of the Tennessee and Mississippi River valleys were just full of people trying to mussel shell and find natural pearls. And we have pearls of all different colors. As you can see, I listed most of the colors there, but the predominant one is white. Why? Because the shell. Most of the 300 species of shells are white with overtone interiors, whereas we have several that have pink and purple and even an orange tone, tangerine tones. So naturally, the pearls that come out of this shell will be more pink or purple, and these will be more on the white side, but you can see these have a hint of pink to them, or blue and greens. Okay, so this gets back to our river story. The lakes and rivers of the United States contain thousands and thousands and millions of shells. The reason why is because the adult, once their eggs are fertilized, it turns into what they call a little glochidium. This glochidium will attach itself to the gills of fish. This doesn't happen in saltwater. This happens in freshwater in the United States. So these little glochidiums attach to the gills right here on this little fish. And this little guy doesn't just hang around in one little area like this room. He swims up and down all the lakes and rivers and streams and creeks, right? So while he goes and while these mussels are attached, they can be attached from 6 months to a full year. They drop off along the way. And when they drop off, they create mussel beds in different areas of the lakes and rivers. This is what it would look like. So they're parasitic. They have to live on the gills of the fish. Why? Because they need the oxygen and need to filter food from them. And what's even more interesting is there's certain species of mussels that will only attach to certain species of fish. So if we lose a fish species, we'd lose that mussel species too. They're also very smart. So if all of the shells that drop off into a little mussel bed off of a fish are male, when they all become old enough to procreate, and they're all males, they're like, uh-oh, what's going to happen now? Well, half of them, they're hermaphrodites. Half of them turn to females. No problem. So by 1904, men were leaving their mills, farmers were leaving their crops, merchants leaving their stores. What were they doing? They were all looking for pearls. Everybody wanted to find their treasure in pearls. And at this time, instead of the Europeans getting them all, the New York City gem dealers were coming down and dealing with the river people themselves. So this statistic comes from Coons and Stevenson Book of the Pearl. It's no longer in print. I think Dover might do a soft copy of it. But this is interesting here because we look at this number here, and I add this because these were the two places that we were finding natural pearls at the time. Persian Gulf, 35,000. Now that number really is only for the divers. That doesn't include the guys cleaning them and shucking them and working on the boats. So you can imagine how many people in the Persian Gulf as well in the U.S. that were actually working in this industry. Pearl value and then the shell value. Now look at that shell value. Isn't that interesting? 350,000. Anybody know why? Mr. Kansas? Yes, button industry. Exactly. So the button industry is the real reason why we had multiple natural pearls coming out of the waters, because we were gathering these shells to make mother of pearl buttons, all up and down all of the rivers that you see. So here is where comes in my strange little pieces here. So way back when, up until the 1970s, these were used to get the shells from the bottom of the river when it was 60 feet deep. So those rafts would go down to the bottom, and as the boat was just dragging along with the current, this would drag along the bottom. These have little finger-like, they're called brails. Braille boat is the name of that boat. And they would drag them, and the shells are open at the bottom, and they feed and they have oxygen. So when they feel this, they automatically clamp closed. There's a little nodule on the end of it, and it would clamp close on these. So the reason we don't use these anymore is because we get little shells like this, which we don't want because these are not old enough to reproduce. So these became outlawed by some states were 1960s. Kansas actually was the last one that outlawed these in 1970 something. So we also have free divers, and then we do something called toe digging. Toe digging is fun because you can go out into the waters and find the pearls yourself. So you go into the water as deep as you can get. I can't go very far, obviously. And you dig with your toes into the bottom of the river with your toes, and that's called toe digging. Now, as time has gone on, at one time, as I said, with the brails, there was no size limit. This was pulling too many shells out of the water. We were depleting the waters, right? We needed to have some protections. So my father was very instrumental in making sure, especially Tennessee, that's where we started first, in creating these size rings. So every species of mollusk that is legal to take out of our waters here in the U.S. has to pass through this ring. If it passes through, that means it's too small and it must go back into the water. If it doesn't go through it, it means that it has been old enough to reproduce for several years, and we can take those out of the waters. But every species has their own size, and you'll see why, because the different species, full grown, are different sizes. So what do we do with the mussel meat? So there would be what they called shell camps, full of shells, toe diggers, and a mound of mussel meat. So the mussel meat was sold to pig farmers. Pig farmers would get them and feed their pigs, making them huge. Now, my father once told me a story about how a pig farmer had come and gotten them from him back in the 1960s and 70s and fed his pigs the mussel meat. And when it was time to slaughter, it did not taste right. The pig meat did not taste correct. And so he learned after that to feed them the grain or whatever feed it is before they go to slaughter, but they can get fat off of the mussel meat. So we're recycling all these parts. Now, another fun story is there was a farm hand who would handle this mussel meat for the farmer. And he told the story about how he'd go through the pig pen every day looking for pearls. Oh. Several years go by, yes. He finds a pearl and he sells it for $5,000 in New York City. Yeah.
He deserved it.
He did. He did. Indeed. Yes. So how do we find these pearls today? Well, as we just talked about, the button industry was one way, but by the 1960s, plastic buttons were the big rage. So mother of pearl buttons, that industry kind of died. But an interesting industry came into play. Now, it was early on in the 1900s that they discovered how to create cultured pearls. The seed for cultured pearls comes from the United States of America. It comes from one of the rivers that we've been talking about, mainly from the Mississippi Tennessee River. 60% of those nuclei come from the Tennessee River in the state of Tennessee. So as a byproduct, as we're harvesting the shells and going through the mussel meat, we find the natural pearls inside of them. So here's one of the mussels. This is one of the washboards coming from the Tennessee River. It's sliced, diced, and ground into round beads. So if you were to cut a Japanese Okoya round pearl in half, you would find a seed in it coming from the United States. 60% of the time from Tennessee. Now, what size are the nucleus? Well, they can be a millimeter, or some can be 20 millimeters. This one happens to be 21. That would be an extra large one, actually. So all pearl farms around the world, if they use a round seed, it comes from the United States. We also use the mother of pearl as inlay, so we harvest some shells for that as well. The statistic in finding a pearl in these shells is 1 in 10,000. Now, I don't know if that was the notation that was made in Coons and Stevenson in 1906. You might have to go through tens and thousands of shells like this in order to find one pearl of great value. Or I can tell you a story about a man that I knew for about 30 years. He was a diver for 30 years, and he would come every so often to sell pearls to my dad, or sell shells. And every so often he's, okay, it's Christmas, I need to buy something for my wife, can I sell you a pearl? So my dad would buy a pearl here and there from him. So I remembered him. After my dad passed away in 2000, he called and said, Miss Gina, I'm retiring, I'm out of the business, I just want to sell you my collection. And I was like, wow, this is going to be amazing. He's been mussel shelling for 30 years. So he comes and he brings this little pickle jar, it's right here. And he sets it on my desk. And I just kind of looked at him and I thought, well, is there any more? He said, nope, that's it. Wow. So the statistic of 1 in 10,000 really meant a lot to me. That's why I bought the pickle jar and the pearls and his story. But yeah, so labor of love, 30 years. Now there is one big one in there, and he did also tell us that the best one that he ever found, he gave to his wife. Of course, no problem. That's what they look like up close. You're welcome to come and look at them afterwards. And we're small enough, if you guys have questions in between, just whatever, raise your hand, I'll. So this is nice. He's got a nice little pink one there. Again, we were talking about mostly white pearls, right? And here's a little golden one here. So here's my mom and dad. 1985, National Geographic did a feature on pearls. They were included in it. So the necklace that my dad's holding and that my mom is wearing, those are pearls that my father collected over a 25-year period from the Tennessee River. They are all round natural pearls from our region. But it took him 25 years to create that necklace. Yeah.
So the round ones are completely natural or cultivated?
So the question is, are the round ones natural? Yes, that strand that my mom is wearing and the one he's holding, they're both round natural pearls from Tennessee. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. They said my parents are adorable. All right. Okay, so we're going to talk about what do these pearls look like now. Of course, we saw some round ones. That's very rare. Like less than 1% of them are perfectly round. If we go around in nature, is everything in a right angle? Is everything perfectly round? No. Do our ears match? No. So of course, the same thing. We don't really have perfect round pearls. All right, so we have wing shapes. Some call them dog tooth, some call them hound's tooth, petals, leaves. This is what they look like. Very famous because you'll see these are more flatty looking ones. Tiffany and Company used them in the 1960s. My dad sold them loads and loads of these natural pearls. Lalique designs. And again, all of these little buds here. Those are all natural, yes. Those are called wing pearls. Yes, the shapes are natural. William Rooser, I don't know if anybody in here has seen any antique jewelry, but this is a William Rooser piece. My dad also sold them to him as well. Angel wings, that's another way to call them. Rosebuds, this is one of my favorites. So rosebuds are a lot of little bitty pearls that are forming inside of the mussel, and the pearl sacs are so close together that eventually the pearls get heavy enough that they fused together. So that's why you see them, they're like little barnacled kind of pearls. We call them rosebuds. This is a nice one because it's got kind of a smooth top to it. See, nice barnacles here. Turtlebacks, they would be flat on the back and domed on the top, and they could be any kind of ovally or off Baroque ovally shaped. We have so many of the different shapes that are Baroque that don't really have a name. Just showing you a few pictures. couple of rosebuds. This would be considered a turtleback, even though it's kind of jagged on the edge there because it's got a mainly oval flat bottom with a dome. Snails. How do natural pearls form? So they theorize that parasitic snails, parasitic worms possibly, or maybe there's a darterfish in the area. A darterfish is when the muscle's laying on the bottom, it's opened up, it's feeding, and there's a little tiny fish that comes along and he's looking for something to eat. And he sees, now when the muscle's resting, a little foot comes out. It almost looks like a tongue. And as it's resting and eating, this little darterfish goes by and goes, oh, I see my lunch. And he comes in and he darts in and nips a little piece of that mussel's foot off. And when he does, epithelial cells fall off. Well, that also has the ability to create pearls because as the mollusk closes, the epithelial cells get pulled back into the mussel and those create natural pearls as well. Some are considered drops, and the drops don't have to be necessarily perfect teardrops. Again, we're talking about natural pearls. These are also considered drops, even though they're somewhat Baroque. I know, that's funny. So then we have some that would be considered like animal bodices. Of course, here's some little Baroque naturals down here. Swan body. Again, less than 1% are round or symmetrical. A nice button. What we would call a high-domed button. Okay, I use this slide because we talk about natural pearls never being exactly alike. So my father in the 1950s had a mentor by the name of Morris Hanauer in New York City, and he went to go visit him. And Morris had just gotten an order from Tiffany and Company, and he said, I need 100 pairs of little drop pearls like these here, and they need them in the next few hours. So I need to go to lunch. Do you mind helping me make the pairs? And my father said, sure, okay, no problem. So Morris goes off to lunch. He comes back a little bit later, and he's got like 4 or 5 pair made. And Morris looks at him and he says, Johnny, like, I need these. Like, we need to do this. Tiffany and Company's called. They need their pairs. And he goes, if you ever looked at these up close, they don't match. This one's got a little bit of curvature here. This one doesn't. You know, one's a tiny bit longer, like that fraction of a millimeter. Well, you know, these aren't natural pearls. And Morris quickly said, there is a head between both of your ears, and I hope that's true in your case. Use your head and go make some more pairs. So again, we're looking at this snail formation as a possibility of natural pearl formation. And actually, you guys have a treat today. I brought this one with me. It's usually on display in museums. This one is 78 millimeters, I believe. We're talking about the different colors, so we're looking at these little buttons here. And now we know why, because of the pink shells, right? Nice array. These actually come from a shell that we call a purple pimpleback. So all 300 species have some sort of name. The purple pimpleback is because it's purple on the interior, and if you look at the exterior, there's a bunch of little bitty tiny dots on the top of them, bumps. So you can see, this is one of the heel splitters. Another nice rosebud here, a dome, wing, pink wings. Now, we've talked about the freshwater pearls from North America, and I just want to mention a few that are surrounding us along the coastline. So the east coast here, we're going to find the quahog or the quahog. Now, this does not have the lustrous, nacreous covering that the other pearls from the Tennessee and Mississippi River Valley have, but these are also very interesting, and they find these pearls as well, and there's a good array there. Now, we were talking about the currency that the indigenous people of the United States would utilize, and this is how they would carve them. These are the quahog clams. They called them wampum back then. And so this would have been used, given to a chief or made by a chief of one tribe, trading with another tribe or trading with people coming to visit, so forth. It would be considered not necessarily currency, but of something of value that you would use to trade. So some nice array. So the phenomenon with the quahogs is that it could have an eye. It's not necessarily more valuable, but it's something that shows up every so often. The most valuable is going to be the more dark and lavender purpley colors. This one has a pattern to it, kind of looks mosaic in a way. That doesn't make it more valuable, it just shows up on some of them. The most valuable one would be the Gouache quahog. You can see it is 14 millimeters, and I believe the asking price is $1 million. Still for sale. So along the California coast here, it's no longer available, but abalone. So they stopped fishing for the abalone along the California coast because they had problems with the giant kelp. The sea otters were overeating them, and so on and so forth. So right now it's closed for that. But they produce some beautiful pearls as such. Very rare do they come out symmetrical or round. Very, very rare, probably less than 1%. Another interesting thing about the abalone is it's a hemophiliac. So it is also a gastropod, a marine snail. And so it only has one shell, and it snails around on giant kelp or rocks. And this is one of the largest ones. It's in our family's collection. It's 266 carats. I did not bring this one with me, but I do have one in my booth. It's 162 carats, if you'd care to see it. It still covers the palm of my hand. The queen conch out of the Caribbean, also called the pink pearl. And you can see one emerging here. Again, how are we finding them? We're finding them because people are harvesting these shells for food. Conch fritters. So the most valuable are going to have flame and this nice pink or red tones or colors. But beware of fakes. So these are fakes. It has the flame pattern, has the coloration, but what you will see, let's see if I've got another picture of it. Yes. So this picture shows you very clearly, these straight lines mean that it's cut from the shell itself, but it has the same RI, same flame structure, and same coloration. But if it's set in jewelry and face up and covered from the bottom, you can't see that. In fact, these were brought to me to be sold to me, and I confiscated them so they couldn't sell them to somebody else.
So those are fake?
Those are fake. Yeah, cut from the shell itself, yes. Yeah. So another one that we hear often in the industry is hinge pearls. Now these are cut from this hinge part here of this mollusk, and they have used them in jewelry from the early on. I mean, even in the 1900s, you can see these where they have carved part of the shell out to create what they would call the hinge pearls, quote unquote, but they are also just mother of pearl carvings from the shell itself. So this kind of concludes what I've presented today, and I hope that the next time you go fishing for some pearls, you'll consider the American natural pearls. And I have to thank my mom and dad, John and Chessie Latendresse, because without them, I would not be here. I ran around listening to them as a little sponge from the time that I was 8 years old, and pretty much learned everything from them. So thank you. And I will take any questions. I haven't aged a bit. I don't know about that. Any questions? Come on, I've stirred something.
So how did your father go into this business?
How did my father get into this? Yeah. Thank you for asking, because I forgot to tell that in the middle of that, didn't I? Okay, so this is a little bit of a story, but in 1949, he was traveling home from Florida to South Dakota for my grandparents' anniversary. And as he was a commercial fisherman, and he was driving through, and he was like, man, lots of lakes, lots of rivers, mountains, flatlands. What's not to love? So he comes back from South Dakota, drives back through, he just falls in love. He stops and he sees some divers with a shell boat. And he's like, what are you guys doing? Oh, well, we dive for these shells, and this little Japanese guy comes around. A little Japanese guy comes around in 1949? To do what? Buy the shells. For what? We don't know. He pays cash. Okay. Well, so my dad kind of asked a few more questions around town. He saw an empty building. He bought it. And he put up a sign that said, Johnny Fish Market and Shelling. So he told all the mussel divers in town, I'll buy all your mussels, and when the little Japanese guy comes around, you tell him to come talk to me. And so that's exactly what happened. Now, my dad only had an 8th grade education. So he was a self-taught man, very entrepreneurial and just really gutsy. So, of course, after a couple of weeks go by, who shows up with the little Japanese guy? And he's like, where are all my shells? And they go, Mr. Johnny down the road's paid cash for him better than you, so he's got all your shells. So the guy comes, and they, of course, become partners. Because my father says, well, I'm here. I live here. I'll handle all this part, and we'll come back and forth, but you don't have to come every couple of weeks or so now. The guy said, sure, no problem. So they became very good friends. So that started my father's interest in the mussel shelling, which then leads on into natural pearling, because as the shell divers were coming in, they also said, well, do you buy pearls? And he's like, yeah, I'm going to buy them all. Tell everybody, up and down the Tennessee, Mississippi River, I'll buy all of the pearls. So he collected these pearls from 1949, and he died in 2000. So you can imagine how many pearls he's collected over the years. By 1965, as we speed forward through this, so he opens up Tennessee Shell Company, that's a shelling company. By 1960, he opens up American Pearl Companies, which is what I run today, which imports the pearls from Japan to the United States. So back then, you just fill them full of your suitcases, get on your plane, and you fly straight to New York, and he sold them all within like a day. So that was easy business back then. By 1965, his partner decides to get married. And he says, Johnny, I'd love to invite you to the wedding. And my dad's like, oh, I don't know. I don't want to come by myself and be a third wheel. That's so strange. And he goes, oh, don't worry. My wife, my soon-to-be wife, has a best friend who is promised to an orthodontist. So don't worry. Okay, so my father comes, and in walks my beautiful Japanese mother. And 3 weeks later, he asked her to marry him, and she does.
She's so
3
pretty.
weeks.
Oh.
3 weeks, yes. So this was against all of her Japanese upbringing. She's an only child. My grandmother was beside herself, couldn't speak for 3 days, according to my mother, but eventually calmed down and realized that that my mother was going to do this. And so they had a beautiful Japanese Shinto wedding, and they came to the United States in 1965. Now, around that time, his colleagues in Japan were kind of joking around. They were like, we buy all your mussel shells, we make these beautiful pearls, you import them, come to the United States, but you can't really too bad you can't really cultivate any pearls in Tennessee. And he's like, you don't think I can culture pearls in Tennessee? So of course he set on this mission. Well, lo and behold, he married a little Japanese lady. She can read the patent information that the Japanese had written for their cultured pearl industry, which divulged quite a bit of information. Now, it wasn't everything, because a saltwater oyster in Japan is quite different in its body than it is a freshwater mussel. But it got them started. So in the 60s, they began cultivating, and by 1985, which is why you saw the picture of them in National Geographic, they actually came to interview him about the pearl farm, the only pearl farm in North America in freshwater on the Tennessee River, which my father originated. So that is how we got into the business, and I naturally, came into the business. So, any other questions? Yes, please.
You showed this picture of the conch pearl.
The conch pearl, yes.
With the flame structure.
Yes.
And then the carved ones out of the shell.
Yes.
So I know how rare the conch pearls are.
Yes.
How prevalent are the carved?
Yes. So the question is how prevalent are the carved fake conch pearls? They are very prevalent. Now, if you were to go to the area and try to buy some, you will find handfuls of them. Not everybody is dishonest, and some people may not even know what they're handling. Somebody finding some may say, here's a couple of these and a couple of these, and you've got some fakes and you get some natural ones, and they put them in a parcel and they try to sell them off. So you just have to do your due diligence, as with every gemstone, and my advice is to just look them over and also know who you're dealing with.
So you're looking for those straight lines?
You are looking for those straight lines, because that is the shell growth, and if you see straight lines like that, those are fake for sure.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yes, Will?
How big is the cultured market for American pearls? Period?
How big is the cultured
Let's say
market?
East Coast.
I mean, so I can't give like statistical numbers. What I can speak to is that people want to buy American, they want to buy domestic. They also want to know about sustainable sourcing. I can provide that in terms of American grown pearls or American natural pearls. They have been harvested with fair wages. They've been grown with regulations. We do recycling, all of these things to create a sustainable market. So in that, the way that I'm answering you basically is that because we have many buyers now asking, where's the source? Where do they come from? Who's drilling them? You know, who's handling these? How much are you paying? It's all under those fair trade regulations. So yeah. Yes, please.
Another. So when you compare the cultured market, well, I'm talking just American pearls, I'm
Yes.
not talking international.
Yes.
When you compare natural pearls versus cultured pearls, do you think it's like 1/100, 1 to 200, one pearl for every?
So I want to clarify the question and also say it for the mic. So you're talking about, when you're talking about American pearls, whether they're cultivated or natural, are you asking like which one is more popular or which
The
one?
ratio, like
The ratio?
for every natural, 1,000.
Yeah. In terms of buyers and so forth, I would say 1 out of every 20 probably. Yeah. So we've got natural buyers and we've got more interested in the natural. I think they find that more intriguing because they, you know, most of the pearls that I have in the collection are pre-1970. Actually, they're pre-1960, but a few have been harvested in the 70s and in the 80s and in the 90s, but a fraction compared to the whole collection of what we've got. So I would say the bulk of them are, you know, pre-1970. Whereas the culture pearls, you know, they've got a younger history to them, but we still have the same sourcing. It's just still the Tennessee River.
So where do you primarily sell your pearls?
Where do we primarily sell our pearls? Well, we sell them all over the world. I mean, here in Tucson, there's many international as well as domestic buyers. Anybody that's interested in pearls, I mean, we've shipped to interesting places. The Czech Republic, Australia. I mean, where pearls are most understood, natural pearls, I should say, are most understood, are going to be in Asia and in Europe because they had more affinity towards them over the centuries, right? But I'm not gonna say that they're not as popular here in the States as well. Yes, Will.
Yeah, Gina, how do we know what kind of pearls you have in your inventory?
Well, you'll have to come by the booth, 802.
How's your website? You have a great website.
My website, well, it's kind of antiquated, but anyway, we need to build it up. But yes, I mean, any what's my phrase? Not your mother's pearl. Any pearl that you can't find somewhere else, you should call us about because we probably have it. Thank you, Will. Yes, please.
Are natural pearls still found in any kind of abundance?
Are natural pearls still found in abundance? I'm not going to say in abundance, and that would also depend on your definition of abundance. I was just in Bahrain. I spoke at the first Pearl Symposium there, right before the CIBJO conference, and I was very impressed because I didn't realize there were really an abundance of pearls coming out of the Persian Gulf still, because oil is big there, right? Oil is also pollution, is bad for the mussels, environment, so many things. But they have an initiative there in Bahrain they're bringing back these mollusks, I'm sorry, they're not mussels because mussels are freshwater. The oysters are the mollusks there, and they are actually tending to their pearl beds and their mussel beds there. So I believe that they'll have more coming out. Now, in terms of the U.S., the way we're getting them is from the mussel shelling for the culture pearl industry because we need the shells to create the seed for mother of pearl. I brought a nucleus kit up here so you could see it, so you can feel it and so forth. But this would be why. So the natural pearls are more or less a byproduct. We don't have divers that wake up and going, okay, I'm going to go find some pearls today. Not like in the early 1900s. So yes.
Now, it seems like the U.S. has a lot of the mussels that will be producing not only the shell that is used for the nucleus, but it's also a sort of resource found in which you find your natural pearls. Are there other lakes and rivers around the world and different continents that produce natural pearls, maybe as prolific as the US
Yes,
does?
so the question is that we have a lot of lakes and rivers here in the United States, and you're asking around the world if there are as well. Yes, actually there were famous places in Europe. They were all harvested, which is why they sent their ships to the Americas to look for pearls, gold, and spices, and they found it. So, yeah. But Scotland was one of the most famous ones. I actually, when I was at the Basel show a few years ago, I bought a little piece that had a Scottish pearl because I had heard about them for so many years, I'd never really seen one. So I have one in my collection.
Just an aside on your Bahrain comment.
Yes.
I don't know if people know that Bahrain it's illegal to have cultured pearls.
That is true, yes. Thank you for saying that. It is illegal to bring cultured pearls into the country to sell. Now, if you're wearing them, you can wear them, but if you're bringing them to sell, no, it's not allowed. Yeah, yeah, exactly right. Thank you for pointing that out, yes.
Is there any button industry left?
Is there any button industry left? Not that I'm aware of. Now, well, not in the U.S. Around the world, yes, but in the U.S., not that I'm aware of, yeah.
You can, I've been to Muscatine in Iowa.
Yes.
Which was the capital of the button
Yes.
industry. And you will see all the factories that are still shuttered up. And outside the factories right along the Mississippi, you'll see all the shells like Gina had pictured with all the drill holes, plug holes
Yes,
in it.
yes, yes. It's true. You will find them. In fact, my father, this is another smart thing my father did. When the button industry was going out and he was making a lot of money back in the 50s, guess what he did? He bought them for their loss carry forward because they all had so many thousands of dollars of losses. So he was buying them so he'd have a loss on his books, not have to pay as many taxes. So we own a lot of those companies, yeah. We just bought them out.
The guy that only went through 8th grade.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah, he was amazing, amazing man, for sure.
Do you have a museum of your own?
I do not have a museum of my own. It's my own traveling pearl circus, as I call it. They do tricks if we ask. I did put some names up here. I'll turn the lights on so you guys can check out the shells with the names. One of them up here is called the pistol grip. Why? Because if you're carrying a pistol, you'd be carrying it like this, right? So you can grip it just like a pistol. There's enough a little space in there for it. Thank you guys so much for listening to my pearl tales.
That was lovely.
I don't know how to turn the lights on.
Education.
Thank you.
American Pearl.
Thank you.